Industrial agriculture has destroyed natural ecosystems and exacerbated the climate crisis. While technological interventions like genetically modified seeds and digital agriculture have been pushed as solutions to global hunger, they don't address the root causes. Instead, they make farmers and consumers even more dependent on big multinational corporations. Around the world, people are already fighting climate change and feeding their communities with agroecology. Agroecology is a farming practice that restores ecosystems, builds resilience, and supports food sovereignty by ensuring that local farmers are in charge of their own food systems. Agroecology combines indigenous knowledge with modern innovation and an ecosystem's natural processes, creating more sustainable food systems.
We go back to how our founding members were doing agriculture, that it was agroecology before the word or the term was being used. So we honor that ancestral wisdom, ancestral practices, and we promote doing work with the land or farming work in small scale or medium scale farms, and that we use the inputs that are available in the farm. So we follow agroecology principles that have to do with the management of the soil, so to maintain it healthy. Basically, we're imitating nature. We are doing diversification. We don't have monocrops. We have diversification. We're trying to imitate the forest. We're using water adequately, sustainably.
Because the time was spent building the soil condition, improving the soil condition. So for the past 2 years, that's what we've done, building the soil. Now we feel like the soil is strong enough, ready for takeoff. And then as we go, we still want to be putting in practices that will not disturb what we have gained, the gains we have had.
Through agroecology, farmers come together to provide nutritious food for their communities. This improves health and furthers regional economic development.
Because agroecology promotes the continuation or the improvement of soil, production is continuous. The other net effect is that the reduction of these non-communicable diseases or other diseases that are linked to the excessive use of toxic pesticides would go down, and communities would reduce their cost of healthcare.
Land is the foundation of agroecology. You cannot grow food if you do not have land. You cannot grow food if you don't understand your soil. And that is where now, for example, when you go to farmers' communities, we hold something called, in Kiswahili, it's called tafakari. Tafakari is a Kiswahili word for reflection. So basically, it's bringing farmers together.
Agroecology also promotes this social cohesion where we come together, we work on one another's farm. The way we are doing as rural women, we see that it is so easy to manage because you are not doing it alone.
Industrial agriculture models make people dependent on international supply chains for key commodity crops like maize, soy, or wheat. When global prices increase, this makes staples unaffordable for many rural and poor communities. By contrast, agroecology provides direct access to locally grown and nutritious food.
It's the case for majority of African countries. We are importing food, for example, wheat from Ukraine. And the sad part is that also our staple food, which is maize, was also getting very expensive.
For many years, in parts of like Kenya, for example, in Western Kenya, in Kitale, they have been big producers of maize. But production with the intensive use of agrochemicals, intensive use of fertilizers, At the end of the day, production went down. And if you want to produce, each period you have to increase the amount of fertilizers that you use, which is not sustainable. And so with agroecology, you are looking at, for example, how do you build on the soils for current generation and future generations to benefit?
Imagine having a population of people that can depend on themselves, right? You're producing the food that you need to eat, that to keep you alive you need, and for your community, and even, at big percentages.
Corporate control, colonialism, and systemic inequalities negatively impact people's access to food. Using agroecology and other indigenous practices, communities are building food systems that are more democratic and equitable.
Because of our colonial context, we receive almost 80% of the food that we eat imported, when back in the day we were producing more than 70% of the food that we eat. So we understand those challenges, and we know that there are historical and intentional reasons for that to happen that has a lot to do with how food systems work, but also how empires work and within our colonial context. So we understand that we're practicing sovereignty, we're practicing this liberation way of doing work that we call agroecology, right?
For people of African descent in the so-called Western Hemisphere, part of the project that we have to engage in to lead to our liberation is what some people call decolonization, or not only decolonization of practices and institutions within society, but decolonization of our minds. And so for us, that process of decolonization is not disconnected from our farming projects. And so we are, of course, trying to find ways of growing food that is productive, both for the human beings benefiting from the production of the food, but also the earth itself and the other animals, insects, and plants with which we co-inhabit on the earth.
People growing food for themselves and their communities takes back some power from corporations.
There's a tremendous amount of work to be done in liberating ourselves, and the first way to make that happen is by liberating the land. Love it, care for it, nourish it, and it will nourish you. Freeing the land frees the people.
We all have the ability to steward this land. We are taught to believe that we don't. We are taught to believe that we don't know how to grow food, that we don't know how to build our own homes, that we don't know how to raise our own children. We are taught to believe that we do not have the ability, and thus we must rely on a system. But in order to have true food sovereignty, we must understand our own capabilities.
For our societies to withstand the effects of climate change and ensure food security, we must develop food systems that work for people and the planet. Agroecology allows people to control their own food and sustain their livelihoods. But only a small handful of philanthropic foundations fund it, compared to the huge amounts of funding that billionaire philanthropists devote to false solutions and harmful practices like increased use of chemical inputs. Bill Gates and other wealthy philanthropists claim to care about solving poverty and hunger, but they are refusing to fund solutions that work. They envision a future where farming is done by robots and drones on large plantations. These technologies will not deliver accessible food for all, and they do not help us meaningfully adapt to climate change. Instead, they feed the agribusiness industry's voracious appetite for more profits built on farmers' labor, land, and seeds. It's time to demand a change. From Kenya to Cuba, to India to Iowa, farmers are growing healthy and nutritious food, rebuilding ecosystems, and developing innovative ways to cope with a hotter and transformed world. Turning away from industrial agriculture and investing in agroecology has never been more urgent.